Okay, so we are now recording. So formally welcome everyone to our weekly call. As you hopefully will have seen from my reminder about the call, we were planning to cover DNS abuse, or not DNS, I can't remember exactly how we titled it to be fair, but abuse on blockchain naming systems. But I've had to delay that until the new year, so we can't talk about that. I did have a standby topic, but sadly it was too short notice for the person concerned to take advantage of that, which is fair enough. So instead of that, we're going to spend a little bit more time just talking about some of the events of the last week, which, as it happens, there are a lot. As those of you that are on the mailing list for the weekly news headlines may well be aware if you've had a chance to look at them. So I'm going to just dwell on some of those. Bear with me whilst I just call those up, because for some reason it's not appearing on my options to share, which is slightly concerning, as they were there before. Perhaps Brian's widget is getting its own back. Right, there we are. Okay, so I should now be sharing my screen. I'll just use this to talk to. So as I said, the theme this week is what's happened over the last week. It should give us more of a chance for a discussion than perhaps has been possible of late. So I'll just call out some of the things from the news headlines to just highlight, but do join in if there's anything that you particularly want to pick up on. Either pop something in the chat or unmute and speak. And probably it would be to your collective benefit if there's more of the unmuting and speaking. Otherwise, you'll just mainly hear my voice, which, well, no one wants that. So, right, with that in mind, okay, we just start off. As there's plenty going on over the last week, as it turns out. The first thing I'll highlight, which may well be of particular interest to this group, is the European Commission has announced a call for experts on internet governance and the DNS, because they want to set up a multi-stakeholder advisory group for the .eu domain. So they are literally asking for experts, be they individuals or indeed organisations, that wish to participate within that multi-stakeholder advisory group. So there are definitely people on here who are well qualified for that task, should be of interest. I must admit, I forgot to click through to check whether there's any remuneration in exchange for your expertise. So that, I'm afraid, will be an exercise for the reader. In fact, Patrick is obviously ahead of me and says that there is no remuneration, but you do get travel and meeting expenses though. So some recompense, but not actual remuneration per se. So that may well be, as I say, definitely within the expertise of some of the people on this call. If it's something you have the time and the inclination for, I'll leave to you, but well worth a look, I would imagine. So that was the first thing I wanted to highlight, and to set expectations. I'm not going to go through all of these because it will take far too long, but I'll happily, as I said, if anyone wants to pull out anything that I've skated over, feel free to do so. But I'll pick up on the third one down for my next point, which is, oh, sorry, Peter.
Oh, pardon me, I should have put my hand up, but I did have a question about this call for experts thing. Does it count people in the UK as well, or is it just the EEA? I thought it was.
I thought from a fairly cursory look that it appeared that you didn't have to be within the EU. There seemed to be a category for and I can't for the life of me remember what it said, but I thought it hinted at least at a non-EU. Okay, Patrick feels differently. To take a look, I thought there was something in there that they could allow for some non-EU participation. It might be that's more constrained though, perhaps. And obviously it make perfect sense if they mainly wanted people from within the EU boundaries. That does give them a few 100 million to choose from, to be fair. So it should be sufficient. But anyway, yes, I thought there was something in there, but I didn't look at it close enough to be absolutely certain. Okay, Patrick's just posted in the chat. Applicants and their representatives should be established in the European Union. That's an interesting phrase. So that maybe gives some latitude if your organisation is established within the EU. So maybe you don't have to be a citizen of the EU. Maybe that was what I picked up on. Okay. Right, just sort of moving on, and yes, probably does rule out the UK government as well, Nigel. That would be interesting to have DSIT put in an application. Or why not? Right, definitely moving on. Third one down was, I mean, it is only a few weeks since the ICANN 81 meeting took place in Istanbul, and helpfully Nominet have pulled together their take on some of the key takeaways from that meeting. Obviously with a particular focus on the sort of DNS stuff, so global TLDs, DNS abuse and multi-stakeholderism in particular being some of the themes of their takeouts. So if you weren't there, that could be quite useful. I don't know, anyone managed to make Echo's ICANN 81 meeting readout couple of weeks ago now, but I think that plus Nominet's summary would collectively give you a pretty good overview of some of the key points coming out of the meeting. So worth looking at both of those, I would suggest. I didn't highlight it, but the bottom one I thought was really interesting. But maybe that's just me, which is the one about availability analysis of brandable variant string domain names. Basically how you can generate distinctive domain names, because there's a relative shortage of at least short and distinctive domain names on some of the most popular GTLDs and other popular top-level domains. So there's an interesting article on some of the techniques used to overcome that, whilst sort of living within the constraints of copyright, etc. So worth a look at that too. But as I say, I thought that was an interesting article. But perhaps more usefully, I'll just also highlight surprisingly an article in Nature looking at malicious DNS detection, and a study which claims pretty high accuracy rates for detecting malicious domain names by combining two different techniques. It's definitely not my area of expertise, so I won't attempt to describe it properly, but it's some sort of, I thought it was a reasonable article, and I think it gave some detail on it. So if that's your thing, that might be a new approach to get better accuracy on that malicious domain name detection. I know there are a few people on here that work for companies in that space, so might be old hat to you, or it might be a sort of genuinely new technique. But it did seem to be research based, from what I could tell, and then also research based. I'll just skip over briefly. Was the piece directly underneath that a longish paper just being published, I think, for ACM, looking at DOE downgrades. sort of measuring how prevalent that is, as well as some of the techniques to defend against downgrade attacks. So again, for sort of people in that area, that's quite an interesting article. Again, definitely research based. Goes into quite some depth on the subject matter. And then, as you see, there's a couple of stories there on the use of Cloudflare tunnels for some new malicious content, which in the interest of time I won't dig into, as well as the use of open source sort of DPI. But next one I'll highlight is a couple of pieces on encrypted client hello. As a reminder, that's the extension to TLS 1.3, or the proposed extension. It's certainly not approved as a standard yet. It seems to be going through a surprisingly long process to finalise the draft after the AD review. So surprisingly long, but anyway, I think still getting posts on that in my mailbox on the TLS mailing list. But in the meantime, Broadcom put a piece out on ECH and detection in the enterprise space, and Linewise, which is part of Coria, which I must admit I've not come across Linewise. I know Smoothwall reasonably well, but they serve the sort of school or sort of education space, and they've also taken a look at ECH. Following on from an article that SWGFL did for the education space a few months ago, and I know Kathleen also has looked at this area, Kathleen Moriarty. So there's a further piece there, relatively short, from Linewise that you may find interesting. And then just scanning down, I wanted to highlight that the original deadline for calls for contributions to the OARC 44 event was last Monday, and that's been extended to today. So extended by a week. So if you wanted to put any abstracts in for consideration by the program committee, you've got until 23:59 UTC today to submit. As a reminder, that the event will take place in Atlanta in early February. It's on the Thursday, Friday, immediately after NANOG in Atlanta, which is a Monday through Wednesday. So it's sort of co-located, or time to coincide. I'm not sure it's the same menu, but time to coincide with that. So people going to Atlanta for NANOG can stay for OARC. So they get sort of two for the price of their travel, at least. But anyway, you've got till 23:59 UTC today to submit any abstracts for that to be presented either in person or online at the OARC 44 meeting in early February. Oh yes, and then also I thought I'd just remind people, those who have at least one eye on policy developments. It's the annual Internet Governance Forum, takes place starting in a few days' time. This coming Sunday, I think the 15th, through to the 19th of December in Riyadh. It's free to attend, but you do have to register. So you can join online or in person. It's got an extensive agenda. For those of you that are perhaps less familiar with the IGF, I think there's about 300 or so sessions over the course of 4 days. So there's a lot of content that's available in various formats, different types of workshops, roundtables, plenaries, etc. I just pulled out a few there that were overtly DNS related. So as you can see on the Monday, domain names, digital inclusion and innovation takes place. Uh, Combating illegal content with a multi-stakeholder approach. I think that also came up with a hit on DNS, but I can't remember the detail when I was going through it because the IGF website's not the easiest to navigate, or at least isn't for me. And then there's a couple there which I think might be the same workshop where the titles changed. That's one on NIS2, governance gaps in addressing online harms, NIS2 and beyond. I think might possibly be the same as NIS2's impact on Global South, because I could find one reference in one part of the website and the other one elsewhere, and it appears to be part of the same the same thing. So I think that may only be one session. So if you go looking for both, you may only find the first of those two. And then the one at the bottom of the slide there, balancing acts, encryption, privacy and public safety, not really DNS related, or maybe at best tangentially, but I shamelessly thought I'd include that as I'm going to be one of the panelists. This is mainly wearing my hat as a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation. So I'll be on the panel there. So I encourage you to join that either in person or virtually if you're able. Thursday afternoon local time, depending on whereabouts in the world you're, let you work out for yourself what the actual time is. And yes, I saw Vicky in the chat. Yeah, coincidentally, Rob and I were at the same event last week, so we've swapped messages, and we'll plan to meet up at some point in Riyadh, even if we don't bump into each other in the same workshops. But I guess we probably will overlap a bit. On DELEG, Kurt, there's a fairly active group. Well, there's a working group at the ITF. There's also a pretty active chat on the sort of OARC Mattermost, specifically on DELEG. But it's a good point. I will make a note to some point early in the new year to do an update on where we're up to with that. But yeah, in the meantime, as I say, there's the the DELEG mailing list on the ITF as part of the DELEG working group, or the Mattermost chat on OARC. I'll put links to both of those with the notes for anyone else that has an interest in that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's been going on in the world. I'll mention the one which I'm sure people based in the US will be very well aware of, which is this story about Chinese hackers exploiting US telecom systems, and it proving to be quite difficult to get them out, to the extent that I believe that CISA or the NS, or possibly the NSA, is suggesting that people might want to use encrypted messaging apps to protect their communications, whilst they sort of leverage out the hackers from the various systems. I think that's a reasonable discussion. I don't know if anyone who's actually based in the US wants to comment if it's as big a story as it would seem. Yeah, I can see Vicky commenting, they're getting lots of messages about using encrypted messaging, which, as you say, is somewhat ironic. So pushing people towards WhatsApp, Signal, etc. Other end-to-end encrypted messaging apps are available, I should hurriedly add. So yeah, that's a bit of a thing. I think at the moment has been, well, I only sort of got my attention within the last week. I don't know how long it's been going on in the US. It does seem to be very much a very specific US thing. I've not heard of anything similar anywhere else in the world, certainly not in Europe at least. Touch wood, but who knows. And then the was I going to mention it? No, I don't think I was going to really cover anything else specifically. Maybe just highlight, we talked about the use of QR codes previously, and there's a story in Bleeping Computer about QR codes helping with malicious command and control communications. So be careful what you scan, I think, is the message, although certainly not the first time that message has been shared. So in terms of deadlines, then, well, I've already talked about OAuth 44, so if you want to put anything in, you've got till 23:59 UTC today, so depending on your time zone, possibly midnight, possibly somewhat earlier than that, depending where in the world you are. Also, there's a symposium from the IEEE on security and privacy. We're called for workshop proposals, as you can see, for later on this week, the 12th. And there's also on the 16th there, just the next one down, preventing tech-based abuse of women. There's a grants program for that, so that's should probably ought to be a comma or something between the women and grants. So funding available for people with proposals in that area, and then obviously a whole bunch of other sort of deadlines coming up. Probably the only one I'll mention, third from bottom, is Eurodig call for issues deadline, as always, 31st of December to get the first batch of proposals in for Eurodig. And then more deadlines running through into the new year, but we won't worry about those. The other thing I'll mention, on the 12th, I saw the two CTOs, one of whom is David Holmes, formerly with Forrester. He's now CTO for a tech company. There's two of them doing or sharing their thoughts on the top cybersecurity trends for the coming year, which you may find of interest. So that's coming up later on this week. I think it's about an hour or so it won't take up a lot of time if that's of interest to you. And then, of course, we've got the IGF, as I mentioned earlier, in Riyadh, and then nothing else event-wise on my radar until the new year. I've already mentioned NANOG and OARC, both in the first week of February, as you can see, and then we're back on the events sort of schedule again. Yeah, I can see the message from Kurt about QR code interpretation, probably more of a mobile device issue. Yeah, I think that's probably fair, but it's useful to be aware of. And Nigel, session on IDNs in Europe, into US, UK, India, and Egypt at the IGF. And there's a lot, as I say, there's about, I think, 300 or so sessions on the IGF schedule. So it's well worth looking at. You'll find a lot of gems in there, but it needs a bit of time investment to sort of pull out the most useful bits of it if you're going to take a look at the agenda, or just come to our workshop on the Thursday. It's immediately before the closing ceremony, so that's definitely would be a fantastic investment of your time, but I might be biased. Which does remind me, as you can see, we won't have a call this time next week because I will be in Riyadh at some of those mini sessions. But if anyone else, in addition to Rob, Carolina from ISC is going to be in Riyadh, let me know, and we can always meet up in person there. That's always a good thing. We will do a call on the 23rd for anyone that's around and working then, perhaps just to round up some of the interesting things from the IGF meeting and anything else that's come up over the last few weeks, reflect on the year a bit. And I think that's probably that is probably it from me. So I can see there's a sort of a few comments in the chat. So thanks people for posting things. Vicky, thanks. Just in you put the link for the ITF DELEG working group mailing list, which is good. And I didn't know IC's already got a prototype implementation for bind for authoritative systems. So that's really interesting to hear you ahead of the game, as is often the case at ISC. So that's pretty impressive. Okay, let me stop sharing for a moment and see what else might be on people's minds, or if you've got anything else you want to react to from anything I've said or skated over. So now's your opportunity to jump in with your thoughts, and either as some are, pop them in the chat if that's easiest for you, or feel free to unmute and talk if you're in an environment where you can do that. And I'll give a couple of moments to see if anyone's got anything that you would like to share. See Kurt responding to the comment about the early implementation of DELEG by ISC. I think you're absolutely right. It's good to have some running code. I mean, that's absolutely a thing, of course, as many of you will know at the ITF, in order to sort of see what works in the real world rather than just being entirely theoretical. So I suspect at some point we start talking about interop testing, but I'm not sure others will be so advanced just yet. Probably more one for some point later on in the new year, I would imagine. And thank you, Nigel, for sort of reposting the link to the full IGF schedule, which is always very impressive. And always good to, typically, I think Nigel, it's normally about 6,000 or so people in person at the IGF meetings, there or thereabouts. Generally very diverse, gender and geographically. It's always a happy contrast to some of the more sort of tech sector led sort of technical meetings, which are definitely not so diverse.
Well, it's always difficult to define a happy meeting, I think. But yeah, I mean, the IGFs are very diverse, very, cover a lot of ground. Yeah, a lot going on. I suspect there will be less than 6,000. I think, yeah, there were 6,000 last year. But this year in Riyadh, perhaps they won't get such a crowd. Next year is Oslo in June.
Lillstrom, I thought.
Well, near Oslo, anyway. Yeah, just down the road. Yeah, so that might attract quite a crowd.
Yes. Actually, that's a fair comment. Although it's annual, normally takes place in the latter part of the year. The next one has already announced the date, which is late June, if I recall, in Lillstrom. And that's because they want to get the next one in before the WSIS plus 20 high-level meeting, which is scheduled for July. Somewhere else in the world, I can't remember. So the intent is to there's going to be IGF next week, and then another one in 6 months' time. It's going to be interesting to see how that works to get two delivered in a relatively short space of time, in order to inform the discussion at the WSIS plus 20 high-level meeting. So plenty of opportunities for those of us that have an interest in internet governance to indulge our interests, I think, over the coming 6 or 7 months in the run up to that WSIS plus 20 high-level meeting. And then probably a bit of a pause after that, maybe, whilst people just catch their breath. Okay. Anything anyone else wanted to highlight? Again, I'll just see if anyone else wants to jump in with anything to complement my ramblings.
I have something, if I might. I have been volunteered to work on a project for the ICANN SAC advisory group to produce a white paper aimed at regulators attempting to alert them to how important open source is in the DNS, and possibly including some thoughts about please don't do this or that. Anyway, this effort is really kind of kicking off, but we're looking for any not too terribly obsolete quantitative evidence of the importance of open source in the DNS ecosystem. So including, registry software, DNS servers, DNS resolvers. We're not going as far as looking at stubs because that's just too much. And and of course, even the commercial software in the DNS ecosystem, a lot of that has open source in it, but we're just not we're not going to get caught in that amount of tail chasing. But I think this is something that I believe was launched by Martin Erickson, who has been trying to, respond and react to the Cyber Resilience Act. And I think he's anticipating the next step, which is the, currently they're in the process of thinking about what the technical requirements are going to be. And I think also just trying to, get ahead of what is clearly a trend. Anyhow, I have reached out to Jeff Houston and on the resolver side. I had a chat with Roy Aarons at ITF. He has some fingerprinting tricks in his back pocket for authoritative servers. Jeff can fingerprint bind servers on the resolver side, but he wasn't sure about some of the other open source resolvers. I'm just throwing it out there if anybody has any great ideas, or I think there might be some commercial market research on DDI in general, because there's a lot of venture capital in that space that might address this, but I don't have access to any of that, Gartner, Forrester, IDC, that kind of stuff. Anyway, if anybody has any great ideas, it's for a good cause.
Do you know Vittorio at
yes, he's actually involved as well.
Oh, okay, excellent. I was going to say he'd be someone I would immediately think of in that general area.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I
anyway,
could maybe reach out to David Holmes at formerly of Forrester, who I mentioned earlier, who may have some suggestions on.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll email you offline. I actually went and looked at the Forrester and Gartner websites and did a little searching around to see what they might have in terms of research reports that I could then beg for a peek at. I think for somebody that is selling a commercial research report, having, one or two factoids from their report quoted publicly is just more marketing for the whole report. So
yeah, fair point. Okay, yeah, drop me a line separately, Vicky, and if anybody else has got any bright ideas, please also reach out to.
I know there've been a lot of creative projects in the past. Some of them though are just so old that maybe not useful at this point.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, drop me a line, and anyone else, please also reach out to Vicky if you've got any thoughts and suggestions. Fantastic. Yeah, I can see Kurt suggesting talk to the TLD operators as well, amongst other things. Lovely. Okay, well, looks like I can't see anyone else typing at the moment. No one else is unmuted. So I hope that was useful. As I say, a reminder, don't join the call next Monday because I won't be on it. I'll be in a workshop probably somewhere in the IGF in Riyadh. So have a fantastic couple of weeks. And if you're around on the 23rd, I will do a call then. I should, of course, say thank you to our sponsors, as you see on the screen, DNS OARC. Appreciate their support for our weekly call. And don't forget any proposals you may have for talks for the next OARC meeting. You've got till 23:59 tonight to pop those in on the OARC 44 microsite. But other than that, have a fantastic 2 weeks. Maybe I'll see you in Riyadh if you're at the IGF. If not, maybe see you on this call in a couple of weeks. Otherwise, have a fantastic break as and when that starts, and see you in the new year, if not before. So bye everyone. See you all in due course.